is Rachel Antrobus. I currently work at West Ed. It's a San Francisco-based education nonprofit that works in a number of areas, mostly K-12, but we have a little team focused on post-secondary economic mobility and workforce development, which is kind of the sweet spot between those areas that we're going to talk about today with this really wonderful panel of people. So I want to, again, say thank you. I just want to say a couple things about how we're framing this conversation before I go and ask folks to introduce themselves. But I did want to say something a bit about how we want to kind of frame this conversation, being more focused on an opportunity gap rather than a skills gap. Oftentimes, it's pretty well produced idea that it's just a matter of low-income folks getting skills and they'll somehow magically get a job and nothing else has to change in the system that's receiving them, nor kind of a more laddered approach to getting more skills over time that will get them more money and more opportunity to grow. So we want to kind of take that onus off of the person and the individual. It's just a matter of getting skills and kind of think about the systems and the organizations that can help improve student and low income and those that we're trying to reach that are underserved to get access to good jobs in the Bay. We know there's some really great technology-based jobs here, but we know that we're not doing a great job at getting the low income BIPOC folks there. So that's where we want to frame this conversation today. And luckily we have some wonderful people that kind of unpack that a bit with us. So maybe Julia, could you get started? Your name and the organization and kind of what the work is that you're doing at HubSpot?
Absolutely, I would love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm the manager of the Education Partner Program at HubSpot. HubSpot is a CRM company. If you know Salesforce, you're probably aware of what a CRM is. It's a CRM company that is based in the Boston-Cambridge area. I live there as well, but I'm currently in Dallas. I've been at HubSpot for about 3 years. In my role at HubSpot, I manage a team that helps professors at colleges and universities represent HubSpot in their classes. So we give professors free software so that they can make sure that their students become familiar with HubSpot, free education as well. And so we essentially package up all of our educational resources, our free educational resources in ways that professors can use in the classroom. And I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks, Julia. Damon, do you want to let us know a bit about you?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Damon Packwood. I'm the creator and executive director of a social venture called Gameheads. So we teach game design, development, DevOps, mixed media to low-income students of color ages 15 through 25. So most of our students are here in the Bay, but we also offer like virtual programming. So we have students all over the country.
Cool. Thanks, Damon. And Kim Mitchell.
Sure. I'm hoping to see you all can see me at some point soon, but I'm really excited to join this conversation with this great panel. And I am Kim Mitchell from NPower. I am the Vice President of Strategy and Engagement that is basically responsible for integrating our very expansive program delivery model, field operations, and our instructional practices into a space where we can continue to innovate, stay relevant to the jobs in demand, and think about how we can serve more individuals. We basically provide free technology training to young adults and veterans, young adults between the ages of 18 and 26, and veterans and military spouses to prepare them for careers in technology.
Thanks, Kim. Before we launch into the questions, I wondered if you all could, I think this is how you do it. I don't know. The technology is not always my friend, but I created a poll here. If you go to the chat function, the one next to the chat says polls, and hopefully you see a poll. Do you? I wonder. Okay, let me see. Well, I created it. Okay, well, we'll move on. What we'll do instead is I'll ask you the question in the chat. You could answer this question. That would be lovely. And we just want to kind of focus our own lived experience here before we get started to the questions about how folks are serving target populations. But this question is, who helped you most to access and gain literacy in technology that you use every day? And I made a kind of a discrete set of options, but feel free to ad lib here. School, work, family, or community. So in the chat, if you could just think about where you were able to get technology support and training, because we know it's important to our day-to-day lives. Clearly, as I'm seeing here, I don't know how to use the poll function. Oh, Alana sees it. Trinity sees it. Okay, well, if you see it, answer it there. If you don't see it, answer in the chat. I'd love to hear how you all are thinking about this question. If you see it, I think I can post it at some point. But we'll launch into the first question. And thinking about this idea of an opportunity gap, the first question I wanted to ask Julia, Damon, and Kim was, from each of your perspectives, what do you think defines the opportunity gap for system-involved people? We named a few of your populations that you're seeking to serve, low-income BIPOC youth, immigrants, and veterans, to the good jobs in technology, whether it be in the Bay or beyond. What do you think is the most kind of defining issues around that problem?
Wow, there's so many. I don't know who wants to go first. Go for it.
I mean,
yeah,
I mean, I'm happy to chime in. I think that one of the major opportunity gaps is the way in which the employer community views and defines talent. Who can be successful? What's the path that's perceived to be the one that is viable and therefore acceptable to the employer community? And that on balance with knowing how many people are available in the workforce that are, able to succeed in tech roles in particular in the work we're doing, but for having access to the skills and the ability to demonstrate their capabilities and not necessarily their pedigree in terms of where they went to school.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in my experience working with our students, I mean, of course you got the obvious ones, which is the digital divide, the knowledge divide, right? So access to the equipment, access to Wi-Fi, and then now that we're getting better at giving people access to hardware and software, the issue is, well, I don't know how to use the hardware and software. I need somebody to train me. And then that's where it's like, okay, well, why aren't they receiving this training in schools? Like I'm still having to explain to people what the metaverse is. Like they're just like, metaverse, what the heck is the metaverse, right? Like when I show up, for example, like my family's a perfect example of the issue. I show up to Thanksgiving with my family and I start talking about the metaverse or the omniverse or these sort of things, and they actually think that I'm speaking crazy. They're just like, that don't exist. That's from a movie. You know what I mean? So the conversations that I've had with people in the tech sector versus the conversations that I'm having with parents, the gap between those conversations is enormous. And I think that there is a communication problem that we're having with the communities I serve, right? Like it's really difficult. There's a communication problem, about talking about the relevancy of it. But then, last is counseling, right? Like I have students that still believe that they're going to get a job working in the factory in 10 years, or that, they'll just get a job working at, Starbucks or something like that. And they'll be fine after they graduate from high school, even though there's now cafes and SFO that have robots serving coffee. Like people just don't understand that the world has already shifted. It's like that famous saying, the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. That's kind of the issue that I
love that. Thank you, Damon.
Damon, perhaps you can explain to me what the metaverse is.
Right, me too.
I know. I think that what everyone has said so far is really great. I'd love to provide an example just from HubSpot being an employer of around 6,000 people worldwide. I wanted to provide an example of like a way that opportunity and lack thereof can crystallize. Now, I also want to say this as a primer. HubSpot does not have any unpaid internships, but unpaid internships, the ubiquity of it, the normalcy of it is extremely toxic for people, especially those who are lacking opportunities to get paid internships. Create a really unhealthy way of thinking about work. I have a few stats, and I don't do this to bore anyone, but I think the normalcy and ubiquity of unpaid internships is so widespread that we kind of forget the impact that it has. So specifically speaking to the populations that you mentioned, Rachel, 43% of internships at for-profit are unpaid, meaning only those from privileged backgrounds can afford unpaid, right? Not that unpaid internships are bad, period, but if you can afford to do it, sure, do it. Not everyone is in that situation. Black, and this is just a survey, by the way, like, no one in the census had knocked on every door, so this is just a survey respondent. Black students make up 6.6% of graduating students, but they are underrepresented when it comes to those undertaking paid internships, overrepresented when it comes to those who have taken Hispanic and Latino students are more likely than any other racial group to have not had an internship at all, but graduate. And first generation students make 22% of their students survey. They're only about 19% of paid. So more than a quarter of students also never intern.
Thanks, Julia. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. What was that?
No, you're cutting in and out a little bit. So I thought I spoke over you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. That's probably my Wi-Fi. I apologize. I'll keep this short. Unpaid internship is just one kind of more tangible way. I took an unpaid internship when I was in college. I kind of understand this, and I had sort of the privilege to have their options after I graduated. But it is the normalcy of it can be very underestimated, and I one thing that I'll combat, especially on the.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Julia. Thanks for the stats too. That's super interesting. I didn't know how many people were getting unpaid internships. That's incredible. I know you all have kind of unique roles in this space, although I think there's a lot of interesting overlap. I think Julia, with the work that you're doing with the educators, is a really unique role, and Damon with young people directly, and Kim with multiple populations. Kind of, what do you feel like your organization is doing in this space that is helping, that you feel like is a unique kind of space that you're filling?
Not all at once?
Yeah.
We're very polite.
I will volunteer you. Don't worry about it. I am a part-time instructor at community college, so I know how to do this. Kim, how about you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, just the very mission of our work is responding to this issue, providing access to high quality, career connected skills programs that are culturally competent, that are trauma informed, that are certification based, provide social emotional supports, professional development and mentoring, and really include paid work-based learning experiences and job placement supports. For us, while we are in 7 states across the country and we have about 6,000 alumni in, thriving in the tech industry, success for us is job placement and economic mobility. And so the number of people we train is important on the front end, but success for us is really around success in a job and retention in a job. And so we feel like we're providing the pipeline of tech talent to the industry. Is now a question of making those strong partnerships with employers so that we can respond to the skills and demand, that then they can appreciate the value of this talent and their ability to be successful.
Absolutely. And there's so many parts to that process. I know it's an incredible undertaking, and takes a long time. I think that's also what people are not really getting at. I think, Damon, you'd mentioned in a prior conversation, like the amount of the depth of work that is required to really do the work with young people. Can you say a bit more about how GameHeads does that work with students?
Yeah, I used to kind of obsess over this when the tech industry started blowing up and we were having conversations about like how to help students. The conversation was all around like, we'll just teach them how to code. And I wasn't kind of like convinced that's what was necessary. I think one thing, the reason why I chose to like focus on video games is because I was actually seeing the data on video games, and the data was kind of crazy. It was showing that the majority of the people that play video games were actually people of color. I even got some data from like Comcast that they've known it for years because they can see who's playing video games, and they're like, it's actually coming from communities of color. But of course, the gaming industry is like 2% African American, 7% Latinx, 25% female, even though 45% of women play games. And then I was also looking at the data in the U.S. that shows that the U.S. is going to become a majority minority country, but it's actually going to happen sooner for those that play video games. So like the 35 and under group. And then if you look at the next billion game players, they're actually going to come from Nigeria, Kenya, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and India. So I was like, all right, then the next couple of years, the gaming industry is going to realize they're actually spending a lot of money making games for people that's not their audience anymore.
Right.
And so I was like, all right, somebody needs to start training this workforce, nurture the talent, and produce the content. So let's do it now and get ahead of it. And so we started in 2014. We knew at some point people were going to see the data. They're now seeing it. And so our focus was we want students to like graduate from high school, go into post-secondary education, because you don't just need job placement, you also need people in academia. A lot of people drop out in college because they're like in these CS departments or these game design and development departments, and they don't see people that look like them. So they're just like, this is not a place for me. So they drop out. So we want to invade academic, right? So that means all of our students go to college. And then after that, it's like, all right, when students get to that point where they want to transition into internship opportunities like Julia was talking about earlier, we definitely reach out to the companies now and we can tell them, you're going to have to pay them because you need them. And if you don't pay them, we're going to go to your competitors. So we do that. And then if the students decide that they want to go into corporate, great. But some of them might decide that they want to do entrepreneurship. So we have a studio where students can like produce their own video games, and then we kind of fund those video games because we also need entrepreneurs. So I think it's a three-pronged approach. Like we need job placement, but we also need our own disruptors, and we need to train them to disrupt. And then we need our academics, and we need to train them to teach something different when they get into academia and push back on some of the professors who come from tech, and because there's this revolving sort of door around this is the way you do tech. And Rachel, you were talking about that earlier. A lot of people think, well, you just need the skill development and you'll be fine. It's like, no, there's some other problems going on, and we need to start getting that in academia before they even get into corporate.
Makes a lot of sense. I love that approach. Julia, how do you think of it if we kind of move into academia, because that's where kind of you're sitting and your work is centered? How do you think about this work and what HubSpot does to disrupt?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do welcome the feedback if I'm cutting in and out. So if I am, please let me know in the chat, and I can probably turn off my video and that will help. So as far as my work at HubSpot, it's really just a platform, and I would love to kind of talk about some of the educators in our program. Northeastern, which is probably an institution that is not very foreign to Mills College, does a great job at this. And I'm going to simplify for the sake of time here, but essentially Northeastern offers an undergraduate degree that is 5 years, because one of those years, 1 year beyond a traditional undergraduate degree, one of those years is spent doing co-ops or sort of like rotations in different organizations. And a lot of these co-ops are paid or at least subsidized in part by Northeastern. So it's this beautiful model of work learning, and kind of integrating it all together over the course of several years. So that is one way in which I've seen an educational institution, again, not so not unfamiliar to Mills College, do this really well. In terms of my perspective, working at a large employer, I also wanted to talk, probably not very familiar, or rather, this one is very familiar too, about those internships, the unpaid internships, and what employers can do to close that gap. We probably, say that phrase where, you thought it was okay for you, so you kind of projected onto someone else. I don't think people realize that just because they did unpaid internships, the world has changed. Just because you undertook one or two unpaid internships when you were in college doesn't mean that you have to not pay people.
Right.
Free. And I think to an extent there might be a little bit of a lack of education or a lack of knowledge. I'm not really sure what to call it. But if you are an employee at one of these employers that has unpaid internships, you can break the cycle. And you can say one way of showing value, one objective way of showing the value is more control. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I also wanted to mention, and Rachel, you spoke about this briefly, is the opportunity gap. What can employers, especially large employers with large systems like the one that HubSpot has, what can we do to inform employers about responsible ways to manage interns or manage? So many new graduates who go into their first entry position after college are no longer thereafter. And that's not necessarily because of lack of skills or a lack of communication on the part of that employee. But employers don't always know what to do, how to communicate, what they need to teach to these folks who are coming right out of college. And it leads to a lot of unfairness, miscommunication, not meeting expectations on both sides. And I'm not here to say all employers are wrong, all recent graduates, all new hires, all entry-level folks are right. But I think that there's probably a mismatched communication in terms of employers thinking, hey, I thought you learned all of this in college and you were going to plug and play. And so I think there's a lot that can be done there as well by certainly large tech companies like HubSpot that employ a lot of people, but also have a lot of customers and solutions partners, but other tech.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, I think what you bring up is so important, Julia, because there's so much evidence to support that experiences is how people learn across any socioeconomic group, age range. But if we don't have the experience, we can't inform our future in the same way. So it has and always been a bifurcated system, because if you have the experiences to inform the path you want to take, et cetera, it already sets you up for a set of knowledge base and confidence and social capital that perpetuates over time. And it's really hard to disrupt that system because it's so built into our kind of DNA of our whole society. And the next question I was wondering about, if you all kind of serve different roles in this whole process, I'm wondering about what you think about what's the kind of ideal role for education and employers. You've been talking quite a bit about employers who really need to step up, but you're mentioning, Julia and Damon, you also mentioned kind of what the K-12 and college systems can do differently. Like, how would it all work, and how would nonprofits help? Like, what would be the thing that we would be designing if we did it well? And what would the roles be? What would we do differently?
Yeah, for education, it's tough, because one thing I always tell people is, if you know how to teach it, you're not a teacher, right? Like, if you know how to teach tech, you're making, you're trying to get paid. So how are you going to convince those people to get paid what teachers get paid, right? And then deal with what teachers have to deal with. Like, that's really the biggest issue. That's why everybody's like, we gotta just tear this thing apart, because for tech, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no way I could run game heads in K through 12. Like, I've had them ask me if I can elaborate with them, and there's no way that I could do that. There's just, it's an antiquated system, right? It has to be completely upended. As far as nonprofits go, I think, the thing that sticks out to me, and this is the thing that I was always really bullish about years ago, when everybody was like, teach them how to code, teach them how to code, is, well, what do we do about the ones that don't learn how to code, right? Like, you've got this big chunk of people that you want to teach all of them how to code. And anybody who knows how to code knows that sometimes it's not fun. It's not for everybody. And so, what do you do with the other people that don't want to learn how to code? Tech has plenty of needs, and there's plenty of other skills to teach. And some of those things are actually culturally applicable, right? Like in games, I always thought, like, you got your artists, your animators, you got your sound designers, your level designers. You look at our communities, that's the, graffiti artists, that's people who MC, that's writers, that's poets, right? Like the skill level is applicable, and now it's just a matter of giving them access to hardware and software and teaching them the hardware and software, but they have those fundamental skills already.
Right.
So I think we need to be a little bit more creative about the tech that we teach. And sometimes, and don't sleep on STEAM, right? Like science, technology, engineering, art, which is basically design and math. Like the tech industry needs a lot of designers. And I think we overestimate the importance of designers.
Thanks, Damon. What do you think, Kim?
Oh man, I think a lot about this. I feel like we have to think about a both and set of integrated ways to work together, right? I think that we need to work more in coalition with one another and not in silos about what is relevant in the education space versus what are the NGOs doing versus everyone kind of needs to sit at the same table so that we can look at this as a system and figure out what value each of us bring to this. I feel like every job is a tech job. I don't know of a job that doesn't use some form of technology. So the whole idea of literacy of technology in the in the K-12 systems is only going to create a richer, more capable set of people who go to work. But but the employer community, to what has been described earlier, is also has a one-track mind, right? And then who needs to be at the table? Other systems, other agencies that also serve and support the populations that we're trying to move through. So this, I know it sounds really sort of corny, but this whole idea of systems change. I also think we need to lead with the data. We've been fortunate to publish a body of research called The Equation for Equality in partnership with MC Burning Glass. And basically our theory is that we want to see more women of color pursuing careers in tech. Today, 5% of the population in the tech industry are women of color, represent only 5% of the tech industry. And so the data that was mined looked at, where are women of color in the workforce? There's about 2.5 million. What are the jobs that they're doing? And there was a mapping of those jobs to what are some of the relevant and transferable skills for success in tech jobs. And so those employers who say, I can't find women of color and they're not interested, well, they're in plain sight. We're just not looking in the right places. Right. And we need to be encouraging women of color to even know that these opportunities exist, and those who are in a medical tech role a medical records job are using technologies and activities that make them viable for a tech job. So we have to help people to think about what's possible across a range of opportunities and careers, but we need all the actors at the table so that we can have a conversation together about what the full opportunity is and how do we lead all of our value propositions so that there's better outcomes on the other side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that idea of, I love MC Burning Glass. Let me just give them a plug. I love their data. It's so fun to look at that and actually be able to answer questions that I've always wondered, and then they have it, which is like, what happens to people who get liberal arts degrees? Where do they land in their jobs? you get to see and break down some of our biases that we think we know what happens with people and their pathways into jobs. Talk about disruption. It's very helpful to kind of unpack those bias that we might have when we're designing programs and pathways for young people and upskilling adults. I think that your point about the kind of the role that that can play in reaching students that are not traditional students. Like I think the point that you're making, Kim, if we look at it more from a skills perspective or a set of transferable skills, most like really importantly, I think you mentioned that, Kim, and you did too, Damon, about like getting people to see that they actually have the skills. They just haven't been taught the language in this other system, in this other way. How do you all think we could kind of get at that in ways that are systemic? I think about this a lot because I think that I've met so many young people that are so incredible and have so many skills, and yet they, even with a degree, don't think that they have anything to offer. Mm-hmm. So what is it that needs to happen? What could we do there?
I can take a stab at this one only because it is not that I think about it more than anyone else on the panel, but I think about it quite a bit. There are about 70,000 students that have been in the Education Partner Program since inception. And so one of the missions of our program is to skill students up. And I think we often forget that, and by we, I mean, myself, I'm not indicting anyone else here. We often forget that you need to close the loop. So the students have the skills. Do they know how to articulate it? Do they know how to write a resume? Do they know how to interview? Do they have anyone to mock interview with? And that degree of social capital is, as we all know, certain populations have it more than others. Again, speaking from my perspective, in being at a large tech employer, what I can say is this type of work doesn't scale. It has to be extremely generous. So when our recruiters are working with university students or college students, they need to present they need to sell their roles. People are not, when we build it, they will come. Students have a very good BS radar. And I think not all tech companies have necessarily caught on. And I don't think students are asking to be handheld either. But seeing content about different roles in tech that are not necessarily engineering related, but like as we mentioned, program manager, be a project manager, have all of these. But where's the awareness about those? So I might make a joke that will not land with some, but like TikTok, for example. I'm not saying TikTok is going to solve everything, but why aren't we meeting students where they are on platforms where they are? What about AMAs with recruiters? A lot of recruiters, understandably, super busy people, but they need to be generous with their time. Videos with closed caption, written stuff, podcasts, audio, different types of awareness and education about certain roles that appeal to different types of work. Your first time entering a career, and it can be tech or not, there's this privilege of knowing how to do things that we take for granted. I was talking to one colleague last week, and she was saying that she had to explain Google Calendar to this new hire. And she had never thought that Google Calendar, I could do it in my sleep. These are things you need to teach. There are things that you need to be patient about. And there's a certain, I think, lack of awareness in terms of how much effort that takes and how generous folks need to be when they're working with, whether it's younger students or people re-entering a career or entering a career. So I think, long story short, employers need to be generous with their time. They can't think, does it scale? It's probably not going to scale. And that's actually a good thing. So if it doesn't scale, it's probably a pretty good idea. But, increasing awareness about these kinds of roles, I think, is really, really important, and not expecting students to just flock to you simply.
If I could just add another bill to that, I also think that we have to make the community and the people that we're serving part of the solution and part of the conversation and the discovery about what it is they need, what are they curious about, and to begin to match pieces together. So, for example, we know that the pandemic created all of these issues and challenges around digital justice and the digital divide. So what did we do? We're part of a coalition in Baltimore of nonprofits who said, oh my goodness, the nonprofits need support with their own tech capabilities and capacity. So let's pull together and create a community help desk. And so you have the very young people that you're recruiting and training into this program, teaching them the basics of technology, and then letting them serve their community on a help desk that's helping the elderly person figure out how to access Zoom to talk to their doctor.
Right.
Or to go online and figure out how to order some groceries so that they could be delivered because you don't want to go to. And so we have to think bigger about what the solutions are, who to engage at the table, and then challenge our larger systems, the workforce system, the Department of Labor, the Department of Grants. Everybody's got these big, grand ideas of all these grants. But we need to curate apprenticeships and opportunities that then leverage those resources to help expand access to people to do this. So we need to make them part of the solution as much as we're trying to solve their problem.
Absolutely, Kim. Yeah. So important.
Yeah, I love that. I'm always thinking about the academic end and just kind of like the teaching end. And I think that the pedagogy needs to change. Right now, we're kind of functioning on a teacher-centered learning pedagogy, and we need to switch to a student-centered learning pedagogy because we want them to buy in. And in order to get them to buy in, we need to make sure that what we found successful at Gameheads is that our students kind of direct their own learning. So they're able to choose where they want to go, what they want to learn, and what level they want to learn it in. And then our job is to be creative educators and provide them with those pathways. So, I mean, the most obvious one is that, hey, you want to learn how to build a video game? Of course I do. But I'm actually teaching you about like spatial recognition, how to identify a GUI, right? Like coding in C# or C++, like project management, design thinking. Like I'm incorporating all of that. You think you're just learning how to build a video game, but I'm actually teaching you 21st century learning skills. I think also our objectives need to change. So it's like we kind of look at the deeper learning pyramid, which is, making sure the students are learning how to effectively communicate, mastering core academic content, collaboration, learning how to learn is a big one because we don't really know what the job market is going to look like a couple of years from now. So if you know how to learn, you'll figure it out. Developing academic mindsets, thinking critically, solving complex problems. And then we have to, acknowledge the fact that not everybody learns the same. Some people are auditory learners. Some people learn kinesthetically. Some people learn because they need to read it. So when we give our students the assignments, we make sure that everybody has an opportunity to do well on the assignment, because some assignments are in video, some assignments require you to read, some assignments require you to like just do a thing. Some assignments have like podcasts or audio files attached to them. And then we say, you either pick all of them or you can pick one, right? And so then, students end up feeling like, wow, I'm really smart because I chose to do it this way, which is kind of like my strength. So I harp on it, and I mentioned this earlier, but it's just our approach towards education just needs to change. We're not in, the 20th century anymore. We're like the way technology's kind of changed how we need to approach not just learning, but also, learning for the job market.
It's so important, Damon. I think it's getting me to a place of like wanting to. It's kind of the downside. I want to go to the upside at the end. So let me say that at the downside being, because I think about this a lot, Damon. Like, how do we change education? How do we do this in a way that actually can sustain itself? To your point, Julia, I love your if it can scale, it probably isn't a good idea. I love that. However, we always are looking for scale. That's how this whole system somehow thinks it's going to change itself. But I'm thinking about how much resistance there is in education, and I would say in the employer community as well. How do we like? I don't know if accountability is the right word. It's a little too a little too wonkish for me right now, but it's kind of the idea being that education has a responsibility to the public, but we don't always hold it accountable to itself or to the community it serves. Employers typically are looking to, their bottom line and making sure that their stakeholders are happy. I don't know where and how that happens at the level it needs to, because I think it needs, to your point, I think you said a couple of times, Damon, like this stuff needs to get upended. Mm-hmm. I agree. And I'm sure we have a bunch of revolutionaries in our audience in our panel. I'm just wondering how do we do that? What's something that we can do in lieu of complete overthrow?
Is that a real question you're asking that?
Yeah. I mean, why not? We're at the Great Awakening. Let's awaken. But I'm just, I think I've been in academia for a while, and I feel like the resistance inside of it is unprecedented, especially if you're talking about tenured faculty. So you can show them any data you want, you can talk about any student inspiration you want, and yet my curriculum is my curriculum, and my academic freedom is my academic freedom. And it can get really frustrating in public education. There aren't a lot of, to your point, Damon, a lot of ways to disrupt in that system that I found fully effective, although there are definitely like a lot of bright spots.
Yep.
It's more than just education, kind of the stakeholders in general. Like how do we flip this around so that they pay attention in a way that they're not?
I have a few. Funny. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Julia.
I'll be quick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like honestly, when to your point, Rachel, when I started off Game Heads, I actually wanted to attack USC's interactive media and game design program. Like they only accept 17 students per year. It's $60,000 a year. If your father was a veteran, they don't take veteran benefits. But if you get a degree from USC, you're guaranteed a job in the video game industry. And so when I started Game Heads, I'm like, my moonshot is to create a program that offers the same level of education as USC for free. Mm-hmm. And we'll accept as many students as we can until we spill over. And what we ended up doing is we ended up creating a program that at least put like UC Santa Cruz on notice and a couple of city colleges on notice. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what my solution was, because I agree. Like I tried in academia and it just didn't work. Mm-hmm. I tried in public education, it didn't work. So it was just kind of like, all right, how do we create alternatives that make you guys notice that what you're doing is antiquated and somebody else can disrupt your industries?
Yeah.
That's been my solution. I don't think it's going to work, but that's been my solution.
No, I love it. Julia, you were saying.
Yeah, I had a few ideas as it relates to this, and I'm just speaking here as me as an individual, not representing HubSpot. I just want to make that clear. Just even if you're, alone at your house without your video on, like raise your hand if you know the top 5 universities in the U.S. Maybe not in the order, but you can name some names, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Raise your hand now if you can name the top 5 universities that have the lowest return on investment over 10 years in terms of your ability to pay back loans, your ability to find a job. The data's there. I don't know if I wouldn't go so far as to say we don't value it, but we certainly don't promote it. And that's probably for good reason, because the universities have their hands in the media. I don't know what it is, but I think that it's important. And this is not necessarily from a capitalistic perspective of like, if you're a university with low ROI, you're a bad university. But I think that kind of data is something that we should really consider as important. And I think it should be easy to find. It should be obviously public, and it should be it should be received by maybe the federal government or some sort of third party organization that doesn't have any interest in any of these universities. And because we all know how university rankings are and how biased people. And again, this is not to say that universities are bad and no one should attend them, especially if they're expensive, but this is to give students and their parents information and make sure that they're informed consumers of the education that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one way that we can help students make better decisions about, I don't want to say better because that's a judgment, but kind of like make the most appropriate decision for them about what they major in, where they want to go to college, all of that. Another thing that I wanted to mention, because we've mentioned burning, or I didn't mention it specifically, and I don't remember who brought it up, burning glass. You might think, oh, if we're talking about ROI on degrees, that's going to be the death of the liberal arts. And Burning Glass, great database organization, actually says the opposite. So liberal arts majors do pretty well, or at least much better than you think, based on the negative stereotypes we might have, in the job market. And that's because they have a lot of the skills that employers are looking for. And so while I'm not saying this is a silver bullet, and I do acknowledge that data can be very biased, I think it is time for us to take a hard look at, are we ranking schools for the right reasons? Sure, the Harvard, the MIT, for instance, they deserve to get, their flowers. At the same time, where are colleges that are relatively cheap or affordable, that are churning out a diverse group of students, that are churning out students that are good in many different things, that are able to pay their student loans back, that are not completely overwhelmed by them, and that are really fulfilled in their careers? Because that's the ranking I put.
Good point.
That's really important.
Yeah, if I could just provide just a little more philosophical response. The first thing is that we have to disrupt every system in order to, because there isn't any system, frankly, that was designed to be about all kids. That's the K-12 system. That's the higher ed system. So we have to reframe who's benefiting from this, and can it be anybody? Should it be anybody? We believe it should be, but I'm not sure whoever is, in some cases, leading the system is always thinking about the all, right? They're designed, but right. Harvard and Yale, and they're not expecting all kids to be able to get in there. So we first have to sort of get our head around, this disruption of and the sense of equity that is at least creating options for all people, but but not an exclusive set of opportunities and pathways that then make everybody else who can't get in one of them feel like they don't matter.
Right.
And so this idea of an equity lens, this idea of creating an environment where there's a place for everyone across every spectrum of the economic strata, because everybody is necessary. And I feel like that's not the foundation of how we're thinking about solutions. And I feel like that's the place that we have to start.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I love the philosophical point of view, for sure. I guess I go there pretty easily too, because I think the day-to-day work is difficult and it's hard to keep your eye on the prize, right? It's a long haul we're talking about in most cases. And we just have a few more minutes, and I wanted to hear one more kind of set of responses around what you think is really working. Like, what's exciting for you every day when you're doing this work? Like what looks like that works, and that makes me incredibly fulfilled in that feeling of this is actually moving. I'm seeing a change in a student or in a system or in a partner or an employer. Where are those glimmers for you at this point?
Yeah. Long-term investment. I didn't mention it. I mentioned this when we were meeting the last time, but I didn't mention it now, is working with students over a long period of time. I always were very, we don't do boot camps. I was always very skeptical of boot camps and brief training programs. Invest in students long-term. And I think that when we started in 2014, our plan was to work with students 15 through 25. And so the idea is that I'm going to invest $100,000 into one student because it costs $10,000 for every student. And that sounds crazy, but I was just well, it doesn't sound as crazy as offering your employees free food and free access to a gym, free access to parking and free access to all this other stuff.
The
Like
massages at lunch. Yeah.
exactly. So I'm, now that we're kind of like 7-8 years deep, and I'm seeing students like be like super brilliant and learning the skills and transferring from city college or getting into this college, but also, having entrepreneurship opportunities, negotiating their own salary at like 22, making more money than I make at 25. Like, that's when I'm like, yeah, this is cool. Like, that gets me really excited.
Nice, Damon.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll let Julia have the last word. This is about it for us. It is about free, right? Nothing that we do costs anything. In fact, we give them access to make money. So and open the door and provide all the services for free. But what excites me is the sense of urgency that's in the conversations today. I feel like that there's an appetite for solutions. There's this appetite for solutions versus who's to blame. Because, nobody has time for that. We have to figure out how to quickly get to some things that are making exponential improvements, because there's going to be 3 million open tech jobs and nobody to fill them. And so I feel like there's a sense of urgency. There's an appetite for collaboration. There's a belief that there is an alternative pathway and that people can be successful. And we've proven it with the 6,000 plus alumni that are in the sector, just doing great things and seeing people's lives turned around and moving from, and Damon, I'm sure this is what you experience, us wanting it for them to them wanting it for themselves and believing it's possible for them to be successful and seeing themselves in places that they probably never imagined before. And that's what excites us. Is what excites me.
So amazing, Kim. I love that shift in wanting something for someone as opposed to them wanting it for themselves. Is like that's the shift we want to see, because that means that it's sustainable, right? After the engagement with that person ends. That's super inspiring. Julia, what about you?
Yeah, I would say the thing that excites me most, and this is not universal, but the thing that excites me most about the tech sector and its in the expansion of opportunities available and roles available in the tech sector is a general, again, not applicable to everyone, but general transition to remote work and flexibility. It opens up so many more doors for folks who are disabled to work at home and comfort in their own home. You have Zoom now with closed captioning for those who are hard of hearing. You can work from anywhere. So if you want to work in tech, you don't always have to move to the Bay or always move to Boston or New York. I think there's certainly companies that are going the opposite way, saying come back to the office now. And then from what I hear from friends, you just end up sitting in a large room with no one else on Zooms all day. So I don't know if that's really going to work or is sustainable, but I think this general move to remote work, which again doesn't come without its problems, is going to widen the opportunities for people from all over the world to pursue jobs in this field. But obviously, especially the tech field that I'm talking about, but generally speaking.
Yeah, that's a good one. And one that I think is a really great way to reframe all the downsides of the pandemic and the economic aftermath. The idea that the people can be more accessible to these jobs and not have to be in those city centers that are expensive and hard to get to oftentimes for everyone. I love that. That's great. I just put in the chat, I'm just wondering what folks heard today that they are excited about. I usually listen to these things and then there's like a couple things that are in my brain for like days and I'm thinking about them. And for me right now, I have a lot of them actually, notes for days, but one of them is, I love the quote that you shared at the beginning, Damon, about the future is here. It's just unequally distributed. I think that's amazing. And I've actually never heard the way that you describe moonshot, and I now want my own moonshot. So I'm going to after. And I also love this idea of the help desk, Kim. That's so brilliant. I love that. Like every community could do that. You really could do that, and you could give people experience that's real and also is helping folks. That is really smart. Are there other things that folks heard about? I'd love to see in the chat if you all have something you want to share, but what did you all hear from each other, Kim, Julia, or Damon, that you're thinking about? Is there anything that you want to take away?
I actually agree with you that help desk idea was dope.
Listen, we're trying, and, so now I need to talk some more to Julia because we use this idea of scale, I think is what you said, or was it sustainability? That if it's not sustainable, then it's a good idea.
If it doesn't scale, it's probably
it's probably a good idea.
Most things that scale are a good idea. But when
Yeah.
it comes to social capital, when it comes to supporting students who have these needs, then
It's not easy to
be
scale.
more generous than you can scale.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. And yet we need more resources to do that for more students and young people. And this idea of sort of disrupting the system is which is what you're both talking about today, has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. A lot of disruption. I love it. Well, we're up on time. I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, Trinity. She's wrapping it up for us. And there's another session happening now, so jump into another one. Thanks, Kim and Julia and Damon, for being here. I really appreciate the time and the thoughtfulness. I hope folks got something that they can take away.
Awesome.
Be well, everyone.
And thank you, Rachel, for moderating.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Questions.
Thanks. I had a great time. Let's do it again.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.